On her grandfather's deathbed, she discovered a secret that revealed her great love. Emily Parker gripped the steering wheel as the car wound its way along the coastal road leading to the small seaside town where she had spent every summer of her childhood. The sky was painted a deep blue, and the distant sound of waves crashing against the rocks stirred a mix of nostalgia and apprehension within her. She knew that turning the final corner would bring her back to the house where so many memories had been made. But this time, everything felt different. Havenport was one of those small towns that seemed frozen in time. The same shops with their weathered facades, the same scent of salt and aged wood in the air, the same cafe where she and her parents would get ice cream on the hottest days. But now Havenport was no longer a summer refuge. It was the place where she would have to confront the reality of her grandfather Henry's declining health, who was gravely ill. Emily parked the car in the driveway. The garden was slightly neglected, with the flowers her grandmother used to tend now faded, and the lawn in need of a good trim. She took a deep breath before retrieving her bags from the trunk, each step toward the front door feeling heavier than the last. When she opened the door, the familiar surroundings almost enveloped her like a warm blanket. The old photographs still adorned the walls, capturing moments of simple happiness, fishing trips, picnics, birthdays, all now seeming so distant. The house was silent, except for the faint sound of a radio playing some classical music in the living room. "Grandpa?" Emily's voice echoed through the house as she cautiously approached the living room. When she entered, she saw Henry Parker sitting in his favorite chair, facing the window that overlooked the sea. He seemed smaller than she remembered, as if the illness had stolen part of his physical presence. His eyes, however, still held that sharp glint, a mix of wisdom and sadness that had always intrigued her. "Emily," he said, his voice hoarse but still firm, "you finally made it." She smiled, but it was a smile heavy with emotion. Approaching him, she bent down to give her grandfather a hug, feeling the fragility of his bones beneath his skin. "I'm here, Grandpa. I'm staying all summer." Henry nodded slowly, his eyes returning to the sea. "I always knew this day would come, that I would need you here, by my side." There was a heavy pause, and Emily, unsure of what to say, sat in a nearby chair. For a few minutes, they both sat in silence, listening to the sound of the waves and the soft music on the radio. "How are you, Grandpa?" she finally asked, breaking the silence. Henry sighed deeply, as if weighing the question. "Surviving, I'd say. But there are things I need to settle before it's too late. Things you need to know." Emily frowned, surprised by her grandfather's serious tone. There had always been an air of mystery about Henry, something he never seemed willing to share, not even with his own children. Now there was something heavier in his words, something that suggested long-buried secrets. "What kind of things?" she asked, trying not to let her anxiety show. Henry looked away from the sea and focused his tired eyes on Emily. "All in good time, dear. For now, let's just enjoy the fact that you're here. Let's make this last summer something to remember." Emily nodded, even though she didn't fully understand what he meant. She knew that this summer would be different from all the others, but she couldn't predict just how much her life would change in the coming months. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the waters, Emily looked at her grandfather, determined to stay by his side no matter what lay ahead. It was the beginning of a summer she would never forget, though she had no idea just how much it would shape her future. The early afternoon heat filled the air with the familiar smell of salt and warm sand. After helping Henry with breakfast and his medications, Emily decided that a walk along the beach might clear her mind. The coastal landscape was a constant in her life, but today the waves gently crashing against the rocks and the endless horizon seemed to carry a different weight, as if they reflected the restlessness she felt inside. She followed the trail that led to the beach, her feet sinking into the soft sand. As she walked, Her thoughts drifted back to the conversation the night before. What did Henry mean by things you need to know? It was rare for him to mention anything about the past, and when he did, it was always vague, as if the words were fragments of a story he wasn't willing to fully tell. Lost in thought, Emily almost didn't notice the young man sitting on the sand a few yards away. He was sitting with his back to her, gazing out at the sea, his posture reflecting a kind of melancholic tranquility. As she approached, he turned, and their eyes met. There was something in his expression, a mix of curiosity and kindness, that made her stop. "Hi," he said with a smile, standing up slowly. "Sorry if I startled you." Emily took a hesitant step toward him, trying not to appear suspicious. "Hi, I was just walking." "I noticed," he replied, still smiling. "I'm Leo. I'm in town for a while, staying with my uncles." "And you?" "Emily," she replied, relaxing a little. "I used to come here every summer when I was younger. Now I'm here to take care of my grandfather." Leo nodded, the smile softening into something more serious. "I'm sorry to hear that he's not well." "Thank you," Emily said, surprised by the unexpected kindness. "He's well as he could be, considering the circumstances." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. Both seemed content just being there, watching the waves, feeling the cool ocean breeze. Emily noticed that Leo was a bit taller than her, with an athletic build and a relaxed demeanor, like someone who spent a lot of time outdoors. His hair was dark and slightly tousled by the wind, and there was a simplicity in his presence. "This place is special," Leo said, breaking the silence. "I used to come here when I was a kid too, but it's been years since I last visited. It feels like time stands still here." Emily chuckled softly. "Yes, Havenport is like that. It feels like time moves slower here, like nothing ever changes." "But you've changed," Leo commented, looking at her with a thoughtful expression. "I mean, after all this time, you must have changed a lot too." Emily bit her lip, thinking about her answer. "I suppose so, but at the same time, being here, it makes me feel like I haven't changed at all. Like I'm still the same little girl running along these beaches." "Maybe we all feel that way when we return to places we love," Leo reflected. "It's like part of us is still here, waiting to be found." The simplicity and depth of the conversation took Emily by surprise. There was something comforting in the way Leo spoke, an honesty that drew her in. They continued to walk together along the beach, talking about mundane things. The summer heat, the smell of the sea, the small joys of being in such a peaceful place. As they talked, Emily began to feel lighter, as if the weight of her responsibilities with Henry and the uncertainties about the future were temporarily forgotten. Leo had that effect on her, a stranger who somehow felt familiar. "I need to get back," Emily finally said, reluctant to end the conversation. "My grandfather is waiting for me." "I understand," Leo replied with a nod. "It was nice meeting you, Emily. Maybe we'll run into each other again?" She smiled, an expression that reflected the strange connection she felt with him. "Maybe. I'm always around." As they said their goodbyes, Emily felt a slight shiver, not from the cold, but from something new, an emerging emotion she couldn't yet define. When she returned home, she found Henry sitting on the porch, gazing out at the sea with that same distant look he always had. "How was your walk?" Henry asked without taking his eyes off the horizon. "It was good," she replied, sitting down beside him. "I met a young man, Leo. He's in town for a while." Henry made a sound of approval but said nothing more. Emily felt a sudden urge to ask about the story he had mentioned before, but something in Henry's expression made her hesitate. She knew he would talk when he was ready, but the mention of that lost love made her wonder. What was Henry keeping inside? And what would this summer hold for her? Mornings in Havenport had their own rhythm, as if time followed a different beat there. Emily woke up early, as she had done every day since arriving, and quietly went downstairs, trying not to wake Henry. But when she entered the kitchen, she found him already awake, sitting at the table with a cup of tea in his hands. "Good morning, Grandpa," she said, trying to hide her surprise at seeing him so alert. "Good morning, Emily," Henry replied, his voice still hoarse from sleep. "Come, sit with me. I want to tell you a story." Emily hesitated for a moment, surprised by her grandfather's initiative. He rarely spoke about himself, and the mention of a story sounded intriguing. She grabbed a cup of tea and sat down at the table, feeling a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "Do you remember when you used to run along the beach as a child?" Henry began, staring off into the distance as he spoke. "You always said the ocean seemed infinite, like it could take you anywhere." Emily nodded, vaguely remembering how she used to dream of embarking on imaginary adventures on the ocean waves. "That's how I felt when I met Rose," Henry continued, his voice low, almost a whisper. "She was like the ocean, free, untamable, and full of possibilities. We met when we were young, and she changed my life." Emily remained silent, listening intently. This was the first time Henry had mentioned a name, something specific about his past. Rose. The name reverberated in her mind, laden with meanings she didn't yet understand. "I was a different man back then," Henry continued, his eyes fixed on some distant point as if he were reliving long-buried memories, full of dreams and ambitions. "I wanted to conquer the world, to do something grand. Rose was my opposite in many ways, but she had a soul that connected with mine in a way I could never explain." Emily felt a lump form in her throat as she heard the melancholic tone in her grandfather's voice. There was a palpable pain in his words, something that went beyond the simple memory of a past love. "What happened to her?" Emily finally asked, her voice soft, almost afraid to disturb the memory Henry was sharing. Henry closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. When he opened them again, there was a shadow in his eyes that she had never seen before. "She's gone, Emily. In a way, I never could fully accept, and the blame, part of it was mine. I lost her because I was arrogant, because I thought I could have it all without giving up anything." Emily sat in silence, absorbing his words. It was clear that the pain was still there, even after all these years. Henry seemed to have carried the weight of that guilt for decades, and now, on the brink of his own end, he was trying to free himself from it in some way. "You've never talked about her before," Emily said gently. "Because I never knew how," Henry replied. "Rose was everything to me, but I failed her. And after she was gone, I swore I'd never let anyone get close enough to hurt me that way again. But that was a mistake, Emily. I lived a life of solitude out of fear of getting hurt again, and it made me bitter, distant." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. Henry's words echoed something she herself feared. The possibility of living a life full of regrets, of unmade decisions, of unspoken words. "I don't want you to make the same mistakes, Emily," Henry continued, his voice more urgent now. "Life is too short to live in fear. If you find someone who makes your heart beat faster, don't let them slip away. Don't do what I did." Emily swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his advice. Her conversations with Leo surfaced in her mind, the inexplicable connection she felt with him. But there was also fear. The fear that, like her grandfather, she might end up getting hurt, that love was a trap that only brought pain. "I understand, Grandpa," she finally said, holding his hand firmly. "Thank you for telling me about Rose. I promise I'll think about what you said." Henry nodded, but seemed exhausted by the conversation, as if reliving those memories had drained his strength. Emily decided it was time to end it, at least for now. She knew Henry would need time to recover, and perhaps there were more stories he would want to share soon. As Henry rested, Emily decided to go out and get some fresh air. She walked toward the beach, the place where she always found solace. Her thoughts were jumbled, a mix of feelings about what Henry had revealed and the new, unexpected emotions that were emerging regarding Leo. When she arrived at the beach, Emily saw Leo in the distance, sitting on a rock, gazing out at the sea as he had been the first time she saw him. He turned when he heard her approaching, and a soft smile appeared on his face. "Emily," he said, standing up, "are you okay?" She hesitated for a moment, but then walked closer, feeling that she needed company, someone to help her process everything that was happening. "I think so. Just a lot to think about." Leo nodded as if he understood perfectly. Sometimes talking about it helps. And so, without realizing it, Emily began to tell him about Henry, about Rose, and about her fear of repeating the mistakes of the past. Leo listened in silence, with the same gentle attention she was beginning to expect from him. When she finished, Leo lightly touched her hand, a gesture of comfort that felt natural between them. "I don't know what the future holds," Leo said softly, "but I know that sometimes what we feel is more important than what we think, and you should follow what you feel." Leo's words echoed Henry's, and for the first time, Emily felt that perhaps there was some truth in them. Maybe it was time to stop trying to control everything, to let go of the fear, and simply live what life was offering her. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, coloring the sky with shades of orange and pink, Emily and Leo stood there side by side, sharing a moment that she knew would be etched in her memory for a long time. The last summer was just beginning, and she had no idea how much it would change her. The summer heat seemed to grow stronger each day, and the coastal town of Havenport moved at its slow, almost sleepy pace. For Emily, however, time seemed to be racing faster than ever. Every moment spent with Henry and Leo made her more aware of the weight of the decisions she would need to make. She and Leo began to meet more often, always casually but increasingly with intention. The little cafe on the corner of the main street became a frequent meeting spot where the two spent hours talking about everything and nothing at the same time. The connection between them was undeniable, but something kept Emily on edge. Perhaps Henry's warning, or maybe the fear that it could all end as quickly as it began. One hot afternoon, after a long walk along the beach, Emily returned home and found Henry sitting on the porch, his eyes fixed on the sea. He seemed lost in thought, something that had been happening more frequently since he started telling Emily about Rose. "How's Leo?" Henry asked without taking his eyes off the horizon. Emily smiled, slightly surprised by the direct question. "He's doing well. We've been spending some time together." Henry finally turned to her, his eyes carrying a weight that seemed larger than he was. "I can see that you like him, Emily. And I can also see that you're hesitant. Maybe because you're afraid of repeating the mistakes I made." Emily swallowed hard. I don't know, Grandpa. I've been thinking a lot about what you told me. I don't want to get hurt or hurt someone by making the wrong decisions." Henry nodded slowly. "I understand. But there's something else I need to tell you, something I've kept to myself for a long time." He paused as if he needed to gather the strength to continue. "Rose didn't die by chance. She died because of a decision I made. A decision I made without thinking of the consequences. I loved her, but my pride and ambition got the better of me." Emily sat down beside him, feeling the weight of the words that were about to come. "I wanted to do something big with my life," Henry continued, his voice heavy with regret. "I wanted to leave this small town and conquer the world. Rose was different. She wanted a simple life right here in Havenport, where she felt safe and happy. But I pressured her, pushed her to accept my dream, and when she hesitated, I let her go. I thought she would follow me, but that's not what happened." Henry's eyes filled with tears, something Emily had never seen in her grandfather before. Rose got in her car that night, driving alone with a broken heart. She was confused, torn between following me and staying here, where her heart had always been. She had an accident, and she never came back. Emily felt her own heart clench as she listened to her grandfather's words, cutting deep. "Grandpa, I'm so sorry. I could never forgive myself," Henry said, his voice nearly breaking. "I spent my whole life punishing myself for not being able to understand what really mattered. Even after meeting your grandmother, I thought I could forget Rose, move on, but that never happened. And now, looking at you and Leo, I see a chance for redemption, maybe. I don't want you to live with the same regret." Emily sat in silence, letting his words sink in slowly. She had always known Henry carried a burden, but she had never imagined it was something so devastating. The story of Rose, Henry's fatal mistake. It all made her realize how much present choices could shape an entire life. "I know it's hard," Henry continued, his voice softer now. "But true love, Emily, it's rare. If you have a chance to truly live it, don't let fear or pride get in the way." His words hit her with unexpected force. For the first time, Emily felt she truly understood what was at stake. It wasn't just about her and Leo. It was about the life she wanted for herself, without the regrets that Henry carried like an anchor. That night, Emily met Leo at the cafe, as they had done almost every day by then. The place was quiet, the ambient music played softly, and the smell of fresh coffee filled the air. When she sat down, Leo immediately noticed that something was different. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern evident in his eyes. Emily looked at him, feeling the weight of what she needed to say. "Leo, I need to tell you something about my grandfather and about myself." And so she began to tell him Henry's story about Rose, sharing the secret that had touched her so deeply. Leo listened attentively, never interrupting, his eyes never leaving hers. When she finished, there was a long silence, heavy with emotion. "I understand what you're saying, Emily," Leo finally replied, "but you're not your grandfather. And I'm not someone who settles for less. I know we have limited time together, but that doesn't mean what we feel isn't real." Emily felt his words sink into her heart. He was right. The time they had together didn't diminish the intensity of what they were experiencing. And perhaps, she thought, Henry was right. Maybe it was time to let go of the fear and simply allow herself to feel. "I don't want to live with regrets, Leo," Emily finally said, her voice firm. "And I don't want fear to stop me from living whatever this is between us." Leo smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his eyes. "Then let's not. Let's live this without fear of what comes next." At that moment, Emily made a decision she knew would change everything. The last summer was proving to be much more than just a transition period. It was a time of choices, of facing the past and embracing the future without letting fear take control. As night fell over Havenport, Emily and Leo left the cafe, walking together along the beach, the sound of the waves creating a soft soundtrack for the beginning of something they both knew would be unforgettable. The days Emily spent with Leo were like chapters of a perfect book. Every meeting, every conversation, every moment shared seemed to reinforce the inexplicable connection between them. They knew summer wouldn't last forever and that their paths would likely lead them to different places, but that didn't stop them from enjoying every second together. It was a stifling afternoon when Henry's condition took a drastic turn for the worse. He was too weak to leave his bed, and his breathing was heavy and irregular. Emily stayed by his side, holding his hand, trying to find the strength to say goodbye, even knowing that words would never be enough. "Emily," Henry whispered, his voice barely audible, "I need to tell you something before I go." Emily leaned in closer, the tears already burning in the corners of her eyes. "I'm here, Grandpa. You can tell me." Henry took a deep breath, gathering his last reserves of strength to reveal the secret he had kept for so long. I knew who Leo was before you two met. He grew up in this town, and I knew his family. And when I saw him with you, I knew that fate had something special in store for the two of you." Emily frowned, confused. "But how did you know his family?" Henry smiled slightly, a tired smile but one filled with peace. "Leo is the grandson of Rose's brother, the woman I loved and lost. Even though I didn't end up with her, I felt at peace knowing that you and Leo found each other. It was as if life was giving me a second chance through the two of you to live out what Rose and I couldn't." Henry's words fell on Emily like a revelation. She felt her heart tighten as she understood the depth of the connection between her and Leo. It wasn't just a coincidence, but something larger, something that transcended time and the tragedies of the past. "Grandpa," she whispered, the tears now falling freely. "That's incredible. I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Henry replied, his eyes closing slowly. "Just live, Emily. Live for me, live for Rose, and never let fear keep you from what's true." Emily squeezed Henry's hand, feeling his strength ebbing away. "I promise, Grandpa. I promise." And with that promise, Henry took his last breath, a serene peace spreading across his face. Emily stayed by his side in silence, feeling a mixture of deep sadness and a strange sense of peace. She knew that somehow, Henry had found what he had been seeking for so long. A few days later, the town of Havenport gathered for Henry's funeral. The sun shone brightly in the sky, and the sound of the sea in the background seemed like a tribute to the man who had been so closely tied to that landscape. Emily stood beside Leo, feeling his strength as she said goodbye to her grandfather. "He was a great man," Leo said softly, his eyes fixed on the casket, "and he found peace in the end. I think that's all we can wish for." Emily nodded, holding Leo's hand tightly. "Yes, and I feel like he somehow knew we would meet, as if everything had aligned for that to happen." Leo smiled and pulled her closer. "And now it's up to us to decide what our future will be." The peace Emily felt beside Leo at that moment was something she had never experienced before. She felt that as painful as the farewell was, there was a comforting certainty that she would never be alone as long as Leo was by her side. A few days after the funeral, the inevitable came. Leo and Emily were on the beach where they had first met, the same beach that had witnessed the beginning of something that now seemed impossible to break. The sun was setting, and the golden light reflected on the waves, creating a perfect backdrop for what was about to happen. "I don't want this to end," Emily said, her voice choked with emotion. "It won't end," Leo replied, pulling a small object from his pocket. It was a necklace with an anchor-shaped pendant. "I want you to have this. It's a promise that no matter what happens, no matter the time or distance, we'll always find our way back to each other." Emily took the necklace, her fingers trembling slightly as she held it. "I'll never take it off," she promised, "and I want you to have this." She took off a leather bracelet she always wore, a gift from her mother, and handed it to him. "So we'll always be connected." Leo smiled and put the bracelet on his wrist, holding her hand right after. "This is just the beginning, Emily. I promise I'll come back to you." They embraced, a hug full of love, longing, and a silent promise that this wasn't goodbye, but rather, see you soon. When they finally parted, both knew the road ahead would be difficult, but they also knew that nothing could break the bond they had created. As Emily watched Leo walk away, she felt a strength within her that she had never felt before. She knew that no matter how much time and distance tried to separate them, they would always find their way back to each other. It was the certainty Henry wanted her to have, and now, with the pendant around her neck, she carried that certainty with her. The wind blew softly along the coast of Havenport, bringing with it the familiar scent of salt and the soothing sound of waves breaking on the shore. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, a view Emily had always associated with the happiest days of her life. Now, years later, she was back. This time, not as a young woman uncertain about the future, but as someone who had found her way. Beside her, Leo held her hand as they walked slowly along the beach where they had first met. "It feels like nothing has changed," Leo commented, looking around, absorbing the nostalgia of the place. "But I guess it's us who have changed." Emily smiled and nodded, her eyes fixed on her grandfather's old house that stood in the distance, facing the sea. "Yes, a lot has changed, but at the same time, it feels like everything was waiting for us to come back and finish what we started." They walked up to the house, which, despite the time that had passed, was well preserved. Emily had made an effort to keep the place exactly as her grandfather had liked it, a tribute to his memory and to her own childhood. "I've thought a lot about this, Emily said, stopping in front of the house's door. "About where I wanted to be when everything was settled, when I could finally call a place home. And I always came back to this house, to this place." Leo looked at her, his gaze full of affection and understanding. "It makes sense. This place is part of who you are. And now it's part of both of us." They entered the house together, the familiar scent of aged wood and sea air welcoming them like an old embrace. The late afternoon sun illuminated the living room, reflecting off the old photographs that still adorned the walls. They stood there for a moment, embracing, feeling the magnitude of what they were about to start. Emily's grandfather's house, which had been a symbol of memories and longing, would now be the place where they would build their future together. "Let's make this house a home," Leo said, holding Emily's hand as he led her to the window that overlooked the sea. "And every sunset will be a reminder that no matter how much time passes, we'll always find our way back to each other." Emily looked out at the sea, feeling a deep gratitude for everything that had brought her to this moment. She knew the journey to this point hadn't been easy, but every challenge, every longing had been worth it. "I love you, Leo," she said, her voice full of emotion. "I love you too, Emily," he replied, kissing her gently. "And I promise that from now on, we'll live fully, without fear, without regrets." As the sun finally disappeared below the horizon, Emily and Leo stood there, looking out at the sea that had witnessed the beginning of it all. They knew that, like the waves that continued to crash relentlessly on the shore, their love would also endure, bringing peace and happiness to the new life they were about to build. Henry's house, now Emily and Leo's home, would be the place where their stories intertwined, where the past met the future, and where they could finally live the love they had promised each other so many years before. And so, with the sea as their witness and the promise of a new beginning, Emily and Leo finally found their home together in the small, timeless Havenport. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave a comment, and check out our next story.